Okay, everybody, we're going to get started now. So let's just start off with some housekeeping. A lot of you have already been interacting with the chat box already, but if you haven't seen it yet, it's on the right side, and you can ask questions in there and interact with each other. We will have team members monitoring the chat box throughout, and we will go through and answer some of your questions during the Q&A portion. If there are specific situations, we'll reach out about those individually. Afterward, you will receive a link in an email if you'd like to rewatch it anytime, and we will also share resources that you can download. Okay, so I'm Noelle.
I'm Kyle.
I am the lead publishing specialist here, so I just basically talk with creators and representatives and businesses like yourself and help educate them on the complexities of music publishing and then seamlessly help them onto the Songtrust platform so they can collect their global publishing royalties.
And I'm our Director of Society Relations. I work closely with CMOs around the world, whether existing relationships or forming new ones. And prior to that, I had been in charge of our operations department for the last 3 years.
Kyle was actually my first boss here.
Fantastic.
I interned with the ops team. Very fun times. Okay, so for today's agenda, we will go through the various forms of revenue that are available to you through the different uses of your songs. We will discuss how you could utilize your lyrics as an additional revenue source. We will also go over understanding the most important information that you need to know when you are exploiting your lyrics and how your publishing is affected by that. And then lastly, we'll go over how publishing can further support your songwriting and increase your revenue streams overall. Okay, so this is a diagram that some of you may have seen before. It's always a great place to start off, especially with these webinars, to give you a visual representation of the breakdowns and the different revenue streams that are coming from an original song. So if you own all of the rights to your music and you have not signed away your masters or your publishing, you would be able to access all of these different revenue streams. So on the left side, we have the composition, also known as the publishing. Those royalties consist of both performance and mechanical royalties, both paid out by different types of societies. So in order to access these composition royalties that are owed to your publishing ownership, so any song that you own a portion of the publishing to, you could be earning publishing royalties for those. And in order to do that, you could work with a global publishing admin like Songtrust to make sure that your songs are globally registered so that you're actually accessing the royalties that are just waiting around at the societies. And then on the right side, you have the master recording copyright, which is owed to the owner of the master. If you've signed your masters away to a label, they would be collecting on your master recording revenue. If you're an independent artist and you are distributing your own music, maybe through someone like DistroKid or CD Baby, you'd be collecting your master recording revenue from your distributor directly. And then we have digital performance royalties, which are paid out by Sound Exchange here in the US. They are non-interactive streams of your music. So that could be anything from like a free Pandora stream to your music being played on like internet radio, whether that's college radio or Sirius XM. So those are all the different revenue streams coming from your original song. And it is important to, maintain the rights of your music so you can actually access all these different revenue streams from your original music. So now we're going to get into lyrics as a revenue source.
So I think, lyrics have long played an important part in music, obviously. I think that's fairly clear. It started back with sheet music and lead sheets. And for many of us, we probably remember opening up CDs and vinyls and taking out the leaflet there and reading the insert of all the lyrics and kind of the important emotional part that played, kind of in our engagement with music. And as we've gone into this more of a digital era, I think it's been very common to wonder where that comes from and how do we re-engage as creators and kind of really speak to the audience with lyrics. And, there's really, a plethora of ways now. And I've tried to really bucket them into three of them because I think that they cover kind of a large aspect of where we're trying to monetize lyrics. And, the licensing services now that have popped up to try and cover lyrics have been around in the digital realm for about probably 10 to 15 years and really trying to understand it. And in this first one with web searches, I'm sure many of us have typed in a song, typed in lyrics, probably because we didn't understand the words in the master. If you're going through Google, I think a lot of times you see now, there's this kind of informational box that pops up. And what is interesting about that is that just recently became licensed through one of the main lyric licensing services in the US called LyricFind, who also represents most of the world, where they just came to an agreement with Google to allow that to be properly monetized. So people are searching it and you're getting a lot of hits. And that really, from there, web searches kind of really breaks down into many things. And there's tons of websites out there, many that you're probably familiar with. I think some just being like Genius, which has been very common here in the last few years, especially with some of the deals they've been doing. I know that I've used AZ Lyrics and Lyric Metro, and there's probably an endless amount of Google searches on lyric websites. And if you can find your lyrics on the web and they're being searched in that way, it's a very common practice. And as long as that website and service is kind of paying their dues, there's some money to be made there. It's not going to be a huge revenue source. It's not, going to pay the rent right off the bat, but it's going to add up over time. And at the end of the day, it's something that we all use. It's becoming very common. So I think web search is very straightforward. Something that we're all learning, especially as creators and how we engage the audience aspect, is that as streaming becomes more and more popular and really starting to dominate our landscape, it's long been just a very kind of audio response and intake. But now you're starting to see these services really put an emphasis on lyrics, whether it's Spotify or Apple, and some of these things where you're getting behind the lyrics or lyric videos and just seeing lyrics become kind of a visual representation of what is happening on those platforms and the story that they can tell. More and more are starting to utilize that and monetize it. So, as many of us probably know, streaming royalties can, depending on how you view them, can be fairly small sometimes, and lyrics aspect of it is similar. But again, it's your right to engage that way and use them. So I think it's important to do that. If you have the opportunity to get your lyrics on these platforms, you should. And then, apps just in general, whether it's a DSP or not. If it's a music-related app, a karaoke app, something, anything where these lyrics can be displayed and probably will be displayed. There's always a question that, if you see them, you should probably make sure that they're paying their dues, because I think that's something we always have to be aware of. But again, go to the app store, and music-related apps are everywhere. And with something on your phone, it has to be visual in some regard. And then a more kind of interesting one, in my opinion, something that for anybody that goes to live shows and really engages in that way, is merchandise. And I think that lyrics in merchandise can be really interesting. I actually did a panel not that long ago with a representative from LyricFind, and he had a fantastic intro because he removed his zip up, and underneath he had a shirt that was like a perfect plug for LyricFind in a new service that they had launched. But that was central around merchandise and how the everyday person can kind of utilize that. But it's also very common for us here and other publishers that I've worked with to license some of that directly. So if you have someone that wants to, print up, thousands of T-shirts with lyrics from your favorite song, usually that's comes at a sort of licensing agreement of between 5 and 10% of the sale of that product, and that can add up over time. I think many of us can probably recall a time, buying a shirt at a concert or something. So, and it goes deeper than that. I mean, we have these really interesting like dancing poodles and all these things that sing songs and things, and that's very similar as well. Just being like how you can monetize these things.
Yeah. I think merch is a really cool one because people don't really think of it as like in the forefront of the money that they're making, or if they do, they loop it together with like touring.
Right.
So like they'd be like, yeah, I make this much money from like touring and merch, but to like put lyrics into the conversation could be just like an additional way to make money off of those shirts, because the people aren't only buying the shirts, but you would license the lyrics to whoever wants to print the shirts.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you think of merch, especially T-shirts or hats, you always think about the brand aspect of it. But from a consumer standpoint, given the option to kind of curate their own merch using the lyrics from the songs that they love, I think it's just an interesting spin on that. Mm-hmm. And as it becomes more, at the forefront and people realize that it's there, and not so much the artist, but more so the consumer, because that is, where it's going to stem from, is knowing that they can kind of, make their own shirt using your lyrics or something. Could be really interesting. But yeah, it's, lyrics, especially kind of in our digital age, are still going through some things in the industry and trying to figure out how to properly value that. And, you could search, and there's been some interesting stories that have popped up recently around really all three of these, both good and bad, lawsuits and this and that. And it's a space that I think just as a creator you have to kind of keep an eye on, because visually how you interact with your crowd is going to be important. And I think that lyrics is a very affordable way to do that, rather than trying to go out and always do videos and do all these things. So something to just keep in mind.
Yeah. Other important things to keep in mind.
I think to speak to publishing and really your business aspect of your career as a creator, or if you're representing someone, having worked on the operations side of this industry for almost a decade now, is there's a lot of power in being the creator, and I think that has long become apparent here recently, and it wasn't always that way. I think a lot of times the business end of this really wanted to keep the creator kind of away from it. Maybe because the creator preferred it that way. I think with the way that the landscape is changing and becoming a little more transparent, and you're able to be a little more engaged as someone representing their own copyrights or representing someone else's, you kind of have to be on top of your game, especially in this digital realm. So to start that off, if you're creating something, especially if you're creating something with others, which has become easier and easier over the years. I mean, you can collaborate on a song with someone in a completely different country, record it right there, release it, and really have never met that person. And it's like, that's not a crazy thing anymore. So having that split discussion, in my opinion, should happen as soon as that song is done, and maybe
Definitely.
even while the song is happening.
Yeah.
Many of you have probably been in a studio recording something you've written, you produced it, and there's 5-10 people in that room who are throwing out ideas, and who gets a part of that, and we see it all the time, conflicts and disputes, and I can't even explain how much a split dispute can just totally disrupt the entire ecosystem of a song being monetized.
And it can prevent so many people from collecting what they're owed, just because they're, I don't want to say afraid, but like timid to bring up publishing, because it's like a daunting term when you don't really know what it means. And I talk to people all the time that, say like, oh yeah, I produced this song, and they send me the song, and they're like, how much royalties would I get from it? And then we get to talking, and they're like, well, we never really agreed that I would get any publishing on the song. Like, we didn't talk about it at all. And I'm like, well, if you still have that contract, I always say just like reach out to them and see. It can't hurt to ask, but to get that conversation over with before the song is released, or like as soon as it's released, before you even leave the studio, and just to even have like an email chain at least of saying like, I have 50% and you have 50%, so everybody can register their ownership, which is so helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it at every level that I've worked at, whether it's the independent songs that, are relatively new, or songs that have been, nearly on the charts for 5-10 years, still being in dispute. It's interesting, but when things start making money,
that's when people care.
And it's better to be prepared. I think that the more you get used to having that conversation in the heat of the moment, the better it will be. And, depending on how you take it and how you want to operate as a songwriter, creator, businessman in the space, it tends to be, in my opinion, it helps to be a little diplomatic in that sense, and give everyone what they're due, because it'll make the road so much easier. I think another important aspect, so many of you are creators and probably have been releasing music for a long time, and have worked with labels and these independent distribution companies. And the thing that you'll notice about them is that they're fairly quick. If you need to get something on Spotify or Apple or YouTube, the turnaround on that is pretty quick. I mean, a day to instant, depending on kind of what your status may be.
Right.
And then the royalties that come back from that realm, the master realm, is so much faster. I mean, you probably could see royalties in a month, maybe sooner. And that's very common in that space, has long operated that way. Publishing is just not that way, unfortunately. It's getting better, but it just isn't. And I think it's a very hard thing for people to digest.
Definitely.
Because it's something that publishing it's been just disconnected. It's kind of the scary part of the industry. And when I started in the industry, I thought it was scary. I still do sometimes.
It's pretty scary.
Yeah, but it's just so much different. And the timelines as a result are different. Some of these digital, the DSPs and digital licensing services are cleaning that up and helping do that, because it is a little more of a one-to-one. When you have a stream, you can kind of connect that. But the way that radio is monetized and television, and you start getting into international royalties and all of these CMOs and societies around the world paying out performance and mechanical royalties. Most of them pay on a quarterly basis, and some of them even pay on a biannual basis, and some even pay on an annual basis. So it when you start dealing with companies like that, where everyone's paying quarterly and biannually, the time frame is just stretched. So it says from the time that you're able to register a song or deliver a song to your publisher, I think that 9 to 12 months is just a really comfortable place as far as expectations. Doesn't mean it will take that long. Sometimes it's faster, depending on where your royalties are coming from. Sometimes it can be longer. I think TV generally is one of those places that can be a little bit of a long wait. But if you're mostly on YouTube, I mean, you probably see money in a month.
Yeah, YouTube is quicker, but anything that has to go through the societies usually takes a while. And it's also important to remember, like, this is the timeline that the whole publishing industry has to deal with. So it's the societies who have these timelines that everybody pretty much abides by.
Yeah. It's tough to be patient, but it usually kind of works out and pays itself out.
Yeah. Eventually.
Yeah, and I would also say on that, like, that doesn't mean that you need to disengage for 9 to 12 months.
Right.
Stay on top of it, make sure things are going well. There's no harm in that, because the last thing you want to do is wait 9 months to realize that maybe something you forgot to deliver something or something didn't quite add up, and it's good to check. And, whoever's representing you, or whether that's us or a manager, whoever it is, it's just good to be informed. And that kind of is really the last point here is, even if you have a publisher or a label or a manager or what have you representing you, as a creator especially, speaking strictly to the creators in this room, to be engaged and to kind of learn about the process that you're getting yourself into, because it is a tough landscape, and there's a lot of variables, and you think on paper it's kind of this one-to-one thing, and it's just like you send out stuff and you should get money back and it works and it's great, and it's just a little more complicated than that, depending on certain revenue sources and where those things are coming from. So kind of learn about it. And I think that in the near future, the responsibility that's put back onto creators working with publishers and labels and things is only going to grow. There's all of these amazing teams working with some of your your in studio DAW things, and trying to create these programs that allow creators to input all of their metadata at the time of recording. And I think a lot of that responsibility is going to fall back on the creators, which is good because it's tangible, it's in your hands, and kind of.
And then you could use that data to collect.
Yes.
What you're owed, instead of it just kind of being agreed upon in thin air and not written down, which goes back to like the split discussion. So that's super important.
Absolutely. And we talk about metadata here a lot, I imagine. And so learn all about that as you can. Yeah. All these acronyms, all these things, and learn about it, understand them, make sure you have them.
A whole lot of acronyms in music publishing. Okay. Co-writers and split sheets. So when you have like co-writers on a song, it's important that you're, like Kyle said, giving everybody the ownership that they are due for helping create that song. So a co-writer is any person who works on or contributes to a piece of work in addition to your contribution. So you worked on it together. This could be 4 people, like in this example, or it could be a song like Sicko Mode with like 40 writers. So it really varies. And this is just like a clean cut example of 4 writers. Looks like they're in a band, and they would each split up that publishing ownership equally. If, one of the writers is doing all the writing and they just kind of want to give the other 3 a little bit of publishing just because they're in the band, that could look different. Like maybe it would be 70%, 10%, 10%, 10%. So everything's up for negotiation, but it is important to get this stuff figured out in the beginning with a split sheet. So a split sheet is a document that outlines who wrote what percentage of the work. This is so that you have a written document. It could be digital. It doesn't have to be like a physical paper, but it's important to have these, especially before the song is released, so that hopefully you are working with a publisher who's registering your works globally, and you can just register that song as soon as it's released with all of the data and all the correct splits, so that none of the royalties go, left behind for you.
Yeah, absolutely document it. Can't stress it enough.
Yeah. That
when money starts flowing, things tend to change.
Usually, yeah. Nobody seems to care about the splits when there's no royalties at stake. Okay, so now we're going to get into a little bit of who Songtrust is. We are a global publishing administrator, which basically means that we represent our clients in terms of publishing and enable them to collect their global performance and mechanical royalties from over 45 different societies around the world. So if you are in the US, maybe you're with ASCAP or BMI, you would be collecting your performance royalties from the US. But when working with Songtrust, you would expand that collection to the global performance and mechanical societies, as well as YouTube, to collect your publishing royalties and just fill in all those gaps to make sure that when there are uses of your music, that you're actually getting paid for those. And currently, these numbers are always growing, but this is our last time that we updated them. And we are working with 200,000 songwriters, 25,000 music publishers for over 2 million copyrights currently in our system. So this just gives you an idea of how much we've grown in the past 8 years. And then here we have a breakdown of our terms. So they're super flexible and easy, especially when comparing them to a traditional publishing deal. So with Songtrust, you can cancel anytime after 1 year. We only have a minimum 1 year term length. We pay out quarterly. So once you receive that first royalty payment after the global registration process is over, as long as you have at least $5 of earned royalties in your account, you will be receiving quarterly payments through direct deposit. We do work on a song by song basis, so there's no obligation to add your whole catalog to your account. You could just collect on certain songs if you'd like. Although if you don't have anybody else collecting on your behalf, like if you're not in another publishing deal for those songs, I always recommend to register everything that you have released. Since that global registration process is 6 to 9 months, you kind of want to make sure that you're getting on that as close to the release date as possible. Any songs that you have us admin on your behalf, you keep 100% of the copyright and you control your sync rights, so you maintain all your creative control. We're simply just doing the global registration and royalty collection on your behalf. In terms of costs and fees, we have a $100 fee per writer. So that would be like per collecting writer on the account. If you're an independent creator just representing for yourself, you would only have the fee for you. If you are a manager or a label or a publisher, who is representing more than one writer, that is a per writer fee. And then we have a 15% administrative fee of the publishing royalties we collect on your behalf. So you or your clients would be earning their writer's share of their performance royalties directly from their PRO. We do have an offer for 25% off of that one-time sign-up fee. So that's Lyrics 20, and you could see that in the chat box area probably. I think I put it up there. So now we're going to get to some questions and answers. You guys have been really active in the chat box, so thanks for participating. So I'm just going to get through some of these. Okay, what type of royalty do Lyrics earn? Performance or mechanical?
That is a good question. It's more mechanical. It's really because a lot of times lyrics are something that you are licensing separate. So like merch, for example,
Right.
is kind of like this. It's a very one-to-one. It is like a lyric royalty.
Mm-hmm.
It's a negotiated rate. Lyric find in services, licensing services like this, operate more like your mechanical society, and based on that actual tangible use of that lyric, rather than kind of this performance aspect of radio and things like that.
Great. Okay. Okay. When you sell your own physical copies, whether that's, lyrics or merch or CDs, would you report your sales to your PRO and they'll pay everyone involved, or do you have to do the math and pay them? So for physical copies, if you're selling them yourself, you would just, maintain that revenue that you received from the sale of that CD. If you do want to give a portion of that revenue to any of your collaborators, that would be very nice of you. That would be actually going back to like the master owner?
So yeah, I think a good maybe example of this question is if you own the master, but you have a lot of co-writers on the publishing side, and you release it through a DistroKid or a CD Baby,
Right.
An independent service, if you will. Most of those services pass the licensing aspect of, say, a mechanical license off to the user. And we do get that question quite often, and especially outside of the U.S., it's a little different,
Right.
Of course. Where you can't, you can't license directly with someone. So, if Noelle and I wrote a song and I released the music, I technically would owe her the mechanical royalties of the sales data that I got, or the sales royalties that I got. But I would be able to license directly with her and pay her directly in the U.S., and that would be fine. Outside of the U.S., most mechanical and licensing things do have to go through the respective PRO or CMOs, and so therefore I might have to pay someone like MCPS in the UK to then pay Noelle, and that can get a little fuzzy sometimes.
Yeah.
But yes, if you're the one releasing it and kind of in charge, depending on how you are releasing it, you may be the one that's entitled to be paying out, depending on what the use is. If you have on your behalf, they would handle all of that.
Yeah. Cool. How do you own the master as an indie? So if you're an independent artist and you have not signed away any of your master ownership or your publishing ownership, then you simply just own the master and the publishing. So you could collect on both.
And it's, as much as you can, it's in your best interest to retain the ownership.
Right.
There's times when you have an opportunity to negotiate for maybe a very large artist deal or publishing deal, and maybe you'll have to consider giving that up. But the longer you can retain that, the better. A very good example of that in the news right now is Taylor Swift's rights, and how quickly that can kind of spiral out of control.
Yeah, it's been like the forefront of the news for a few weeks. Okay, so we use the Orchard to distribute our music. Can I sign up for Songtrust? So I'm going to switch out the Orchard with the Orchard or DistroKid or CD Baby or TuneCore. So any distributor that you're using for that side of your music, as long as you have not entered a publishing agreement with them, you are perfectly free to sign up for a publishing service like Songtrust. They do handle different revenue streams. So on the distribution and label side, that's all the master recording royalties. And then for Songtrust, it's all the publishing royalties. So you do need to have both a distributor / label or and a publisher to be able to collect. You also need to have Sound Exchange in the US and your PRO. So those 4 things and you're set. Okay. Does Songtrust collect satellite royalties?
Yeah. I'm going to kind of guess that is very much in the digital radio space, is what they're kind of getting at.
I think.
So yes, it operates relatively similar to streaming.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of somewhere in between, your streaming and your terrestrial radio space. Right. However, it's a much cleaner collection process than traditional radio because it's digital.
Right.
So yes.
What makes you different from Spotify? Hold on. What makes you different from Spotify in reference to publishing amounts? So Spotify is a digital service provider where people would be streaming your music. Spotify would pay the royalties owed to those streams to the different societies, depending on where the stream happened. And then by having your songs registered at those societies by Songtrust, you could access those royalties. So they're just at different points in the stream of where your royalties are, but very different.
I think this also might be a reference to, I believe it is Spotify, maybe a couple others, that are allowing creators to go directly to them, and as a result, collect some of their master side and sales.
Which they
directly
stopped, I think.
Have they stopped? Yes.
Yeah. So Spotify launched a direct thing for Spotify for artists. One of our teammates used it, and they canceled it.
It didn't last very long.
Yeah. So it was like in beta, and then they canceled it.
SoundCloud, I think, is another one that's trying these things. So it's not uncommon. Those types of services, whether it's a DSP or anything, are very rarely in the publishing space. So when you hear a service saying they can give you royalties directly, always check to see if it's kind of the whole pie, if you will, because it very rarely is inclusive of the publishing.
Yeah, definitely. Somebody is asking to list the 4 things that you need in the US for collecting your revenue streams. So I'm going to go through it one more time.
Right.
So you need to have your PRO. You need to be affiliated as a songwriter/composer there. And if you're not with a PRO, you could actually affiliate with one through Songtrust for free. So then second would be Songtrust as your global publishing administrator, making sure that you're collecting globally all your publishing royalties. And then your distributor/label and sound exchange. So those 4 things, and you're all set to collect all of the revenue streams that are coming from your music.
And outside the US, there's a very obvious kind of counterpart to all of them. So, I mean, searching those here in the US, even as someone outside the US, should still be aware of what's happening in the US.
Right, especially
they
because
do have counterparts, most certainly, everywhere in the world.
Yeah, and it's important to consider that the US is the largest music market. So to be paying attention to the royalty sources coming from here, even if you're not in the US, you should be with Sound Exchange, and you should have your music registered at the US societies. So it's still really important. And no matter where you are in the world, you can sign up for Songtrust and affiliate with a PRO through us, and then just register all your works in your account, and we'll make sure that they're registered globally. Okay, let's look at some more questions. Okay. What is the difference between owning the publishing as an artist or as a company?
Well, as sometimes it can be one or the other, sometimes it can be both.
Right.
So it always starts with an artist or a creator or songwriter. And when it starts to change, and I think the big thing with Songtrust is that we know Songtrust doesn't get into the ownership of copyright, so we simply are admin. However, many publishers and companies will. To sign someone, they might negotiate what is commonly called a co-publishing deal, where they take half ownership of a song. And usually the reason for that is because they have a little more stake in the song and therefore do some additional services, such as pitching songs for sync and, perhaps trying to put together writing sessions for new songs, of which then they would own half of, and things of that nature. There's nothing wrong with that. It's kind of part of the industry to do that. And if you need those services, then there's nothing wrong with giving that out. Another aspect of that, which is coming a little more common online, but it's also long been a part of major publishers, is that companies can now just buy out the rights of a song completely. And that is, a lot of your larger publishing companies do that. Because then they have full control over whatever they want to use the song for. If they want to license it in a beer commercial or something, where sometimes writers maybe don't align with that, they can do that, and they can monetize it to as much as they want. So it kind of, you figure out where you fall in that landscape, and sometimes none of them are the wrong answer if the time calls for it.
Yeah.
But if you have to be cautious, owning your own rights is always the best choice. Yeah,
and I think it's important, even if you do want a traditional publishing deal or a co-publishing deal, at some point in your career, there's no rush to do that. If anything, if you just keep making music, your catalog would just like increase in value. And there's no reason that you should not collect on your royalties in the meantime while you're waiting for that perfect traditional publishing deal to come along, which is what you could use Songtrust for, which could also give you leverage for going into these conversations, knowing the value of your catalog and what you've been earning through global registration. So that's, you could start with one and go to the other, or vice versa. You could
to put for some of the companies that are probably listening now, as I think there are a few managers or publishing companies, I think the value that you add is getting very well versed and connected in the creative space.
Right.
Working with sync companies and advertising companies and television companies, and providing a great marketing package, and that is like inherently the value that can be added by these companies. And when you do that and you really develop something very strong, that is where it can be very enticing for a creator to, give up something that is very much theirs. So there is no wrong or right. It's just the timing.
Right, and it's what's right for you and what you want for your career. Okay, let's do one more question. I think I saw a good one. Okay, what about lyric videos? Is there additional licensing for use of the lyrics on YouTube, for example?
YouTube is interesting.
Always.
Yes, because of just kind of their general model around it. So YouTube is different because they've long kind of gotten away from the model where people are taking things down because it's not licensed in a certain way, but rather than that it's monetized in a certain way. And that is based more on kind of like an algorithm. So whether it's a visual thing or lyrics. So the way that YouTube pays that out is kind of interesting and maybe not necessarily exactly a perfect answer to that question. However, if it is a very, if a company is releasing like very much an exclusive like lyric video on YouTube with a big song, the likelihood that they license that directly with the publisher is very high.
Right.
So it's kind of somewhere in the middle, a little bit of both. If you're especially making a lyric video of someone else's, and it might go not only on YouTube but elsewhere, say a website, then you should absolutely license it with the writers.
Yeah.
YouTube is kind of this like murky playground of rights sometimes. However, is a great revenue source as well. So maybe to be a little broader as being like, if I'm putting a lyric video on the web, then yes, you should license it. And the fee that comes along with it is very much negotiable. And it's becoming very common. You're seeing lyric videos become, in some ways, the more common of video nowadays.
Yeah.
Whether it's being put on a DSP or YouTube or websites and what have you.
Yeah, I've actually been seeing a lot of like companies using lyric videos as a way to promote new artists and their like songs. Like I'm pretty sure Genius does it, where they'll have the artists kind of like sit there and read their lyrics with the lyrics next to them, like in the video, which is really cool. So it's always like, you could create something like that on your own, like on your channel, just as like a way for people to interact with you more. So there's really endless opportunities for putting yourself out there and including your lyrics in that process.
Yeah, I really love what some of the DSPs are doing now with the explaining what the lyrics mean and having these kind of like subplots to what it means. I think I read a Jay-Z book that did this one time, which was like a physical book though.
Yeah.
But I think like that's kind of interesting to like see where these lyrics stem from and like the true story behind them.
Yeah.
That is valuable in probably many ways, even apart from actual royalties.
Right.
Although royalties are cool.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but the lyrics get on to the DSPs like Spotify through the distributor.
Yeah, that is a good thing kind of to leave with. Being like, it's actually not all that common for lyrics to be submitted to the publisher. It can be. And
Yeah.
we are absolutely have a feed into some of these licensing services, not the DSPs directly, but
Right.
most lyrics, interestingly enough, come from the web.
Right.
So they kind of get up there in a couple different ways, and then these services actually are using them, and that's one of the kind of weird, controversial things that was just in the news recently between Genius and Google. But it kind of is just the way it works. So the best way to get them up is either you can submit them to some of these websites directly, like Genius and AZ Lyrics and what have you. There are some of the distribution companies that are allowing for it now, and if you have the opportunity.
I think DistroKid allows us
Yeah.
to do it. Emilio is pointing that out.
Yes, absolutely. And not all of them do it, so it's not always just like an expectation, but many do. And then I think even some of the DSPs allow for it, and it kind of depends. But like any bit of metadata, if you have an opportunity to put it somewhere on any service that you use, or deliver it to anyone that is doing it on your behalf, take the extra time to do it. The one thing with lyrics to keep in mind is that the submission of those lyrics to most mediums is, I don't want to say strict, but there's very much a template for it. So kind of keep that in mind when using these services, that they will most certainly spell it out for you, but kind of deliver in the way that they intend you to.
The more data, the better.
Absolutely.